Hey YouTube, Mr. Terry back here once again for another history video. Today we are watching part 2 of Oversimplified's video series on the French Revolution. If you haven't seen part 1, make sure you see that first so you can see what's going on. But today we're going to finish up part 2. As always, I'm going to leave a link down below to the original video. If you like the original animated video here, make sure that you go to the link and give support to the Oversimplified crew who do such, amazing work with these types of videos. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. Part 2.
King Louis and his family were now in the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where for the next couple of years, he watched as the revolutionary government began to strip away his power. And fearing for his safety, he had to stay on their good side. Hey, look who it is. It's my favorite revolutionaries. Yep, I'm your #1 fan. What can I do for you? Hey, King Louis, so we've made a few decisions. First, all of your friends in the nobility are going to have to pay taxes the same as everyone else. Great idea. I love it. And as a side note, the tax money can no longer pay for all your lavish parties. Great.
Uh-oh.
I hate those parties. They're so awkward. And also, we're taking away your Porsche. Oh, come on! I mean, yay.
You get the feeling at this point, it doesn't look good for the king, right? And if you saw part 1, you know exactly what we're talking about. It's just every step the revolution is taking is slowly chipping away at the power of the monarchy itself, right? And again, in the early days, it would have been very radical for those that really were supporting the idea of getting rid of the monarchy completely. You know what I mean? People looked at England, for an example, the UK, with how they have a constitutional monarchy, where you got this monarchy figurehead, and then you have a constitution that limits those powers and gives rights to the people and holds the government accountable that way. By government, I mean the monarchy at this time. And you can see, yeah, he's kind of just playing with this little adaptation. He's kind of playing with the flow of things, where it's like he's going to have to get on board on some of these things, especially at this point. Otherwise, he's going to lose what little he has probably at this point. So, really has no other choice.
The king continually found demand after demand being made of him to prove his support for the revolution.
Yep.
On one occasion, a mob would invade the palace and demand he wear the revolutionary bonnet. This is the face of a man who is definitely pretending he wants to wear that bonnet.
Yeah.
Now, around here, I want to mention that one thing King Louis had a problem with was people
I don't know, it was a
raiding his
revolutionary
palace.
bonnet.
But one thing he didn't have a problem with was raiding noobs on this video's sponsor, Raid Shadow
yes,
Legends.
the ad.
Raid Shadow Legends is a brand new collection RPG game.
I always let these play so it supports the original people. So this looks like something you're into. Make sure you go into it. But
there's over 400 champions for you to collect and
as this is going here,
crazy battles and events that will get
you see with events like what happens, that the events that led to the tennis court oath and things like that, that he is not, the King Louis has not shown himself as somebody that is a person of the revolution, and he kind of needs to now, especially as the violence is going to pick up, which it's going to. It's going to be bad.
Now, where was I? Oh yeah. Seeing the
revolutionary
rapidly turning
slouchy
against
beanie.
him, the king decided it might be a good idea to leave France and mount a campaign to retake his country from abroad. Luckily for him, he was married to an Austrian, so on the night of June 20th, 1791, the king and his family disguised themselves as servants and attempted to flee to the Austrian Netherlands.
Bad idea. If you want to show that you are a person of the people, don't leave the people. And he doesn't do that. Now he does it in secrecy. He's not announcing he's leaving. But you can see he's got other plans up his sleeves, like try to find other countries that are supportive of him. Of course, Austria is, because they are an alliance, and the queen, of course, is Austrian herself. So looks like he's making this almost looks more like an escape than anything else. It would be really bad if he got caught, because if he gets caught, it looks like he's fleeing. He is not somebody that supports the revolution, let alone somebody that wants to destroy it from within. So this is a very dangerous move here.
The king and his family disguised themselves as servants and attempted to flee to the Austrian Netherlands. The royal carriage made a stop in the town of Varennes, and the postmaster there was like, "Hey guys, what's up? Where are you off to? We are but a collection of inconspicuous servants heading for the border for no particular reason at all." Say, you, the fat one, you look kind of familiar. Aren't you the king? Nope. Let me see your passport. It says here you're King Louis the 16th. Nope, not me. Take him away, boys. The king was
If that's true, I thought I had heard something before that they had spotted him on coinage. That may not. I might be mixing that up with something else. And if that was another thing, let me know that had spotted him, like his face on a coin. I might be thinking of something else wrong or different. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if he really had a passport with his own name, that was a really stupid plan.
promptly returned to Paris. But now,
the
jig was up. His
now it
lack
looks
of
bad.
support for the revolution was clear to all, and many considered him a straight-up traitor who tried to abandon his people.
I mean, how could you paint
As
it
a
any
result,
other way?
The new constitution of 1791
New
completely
constitution.
reduced his powers to that
There's
of
the
a simple
king.
figurehead, a constitutional monarch.
There you go.
However, radicals, such as those in the Jacobin Club, were outraged that the king wasn't to be removed entirely. So a month later, these radicals staged a protest on
Look how
the
divided
Champs-Élysées,
France is.
calling for the king's removal. The government of Paris feared an insurrection was mounting, and they sent the military to disperse the crowd. The confrontation escalated and resulted in the Revolutionary National Guard firing on a crowd of revolutionaries. It was a massacre. The incident exposed a deep division within the Brotherhood of the Revolution. On one side, the moderates who wanted to keep the king as a figurehead. On the other, radicals who wanted to see the king deposed and heads roll.
This is a problem. When you have a revolution like this that has such a vast difference between the people and what they want, that's very difficult. Especially if you care at all about and are willing to compromise, right? Willing to actually compromise. So you got these moderates over here that would like to see the king remain in power, remain, but not necessarily have the power that they want, right? A constitutional monarch. Where you got these radicals, the Jacobins, who are like, no. So this is, I think, a really difficult point of what are they going to decide to do here? Because you risk alienating and people that side with you on a lot of things, but not on all things, right? And some people worry if this is where you create your own enemy out of your own people. You have your own people that you support on some things, and you basically radicalize them by failing to compromise, and then they distrust people within their own group. So it's kind of dividing from within, and then that's going to be very difficult to do, to see if they can actually agree on things, because there were so many things that looked like they agreed upon at this point, but now you're getting to points where very disagreeable. Again, like what should be the future of the monarchy, which is not something you really needed to discuss early on, but now you definitely need to address it, especially after the events of him trying to flee France. So this is going to be difficult of how they can come to some kind of compromise, if they can.
Figurehead. On the other, radicals who wanted to see the king deposed and heads roll. In the wake of the massacre, these radicals received a wave of support. And speaking of rolling heads, one form of equality the revolution introduced was equality in execution. This meant no more torturous drawing and quartering, no more inhumane hanging. They wanted all criminals, regardless of economic status, to receive the same penalty.
That's
a
very
quick and painless
equal.
one. Luckily, a man by the name of Dr. Joseph Guillotine had an idea.
We all know
a
about
heavy
this,
blade
right?
that falls like thunder. The head flies off, blood spurts, and the man is no more. The guillotine, otherwise known as the National Razor. The guillotine made its debut in 1791 as the new form of execution. The writings of Marat and others continued to call for the execution of anyone suspected of working against the revolution.
Let's talk about the guillotine. This is one of the things I get all the time in class. You know, there's that morbid curiosity that people have about the guillotine and how it works, and I get same morbid questions all the time where it's like, Mr. Terry, I heard that, you know, when your head gets cut off, that your body can, like, survive for a little bit, and your head can even have functionality for a while. And I go through and I talk about it and show things, all these weird studies apparently that people have done of trying to test consciousness even after somebody has been decapitated. But that's a story for another time. You can look into that if you're into that morbid curiosity. But the idea of the guillotine is such a interesting, I guess, thing, for the fact that a way to execute people. And if you're wondering, why not just chop a head off, or a firing squad, or all of those sort of things? Now, you heard them talk about how it's like they're almost trying to make executions humane. But I mean, once you're killing somebody, I don't know if there's much humanity that you could agree upon with that. That you'd be like, well, who cares if it's humane or not? It's someone that's going to be dead, right? But the idea, not that it's like, I mean, it's supposed to be a painless thing and all that sort of thing, but that it was supposed to, supposedly, be like a painless thing. And that also, that it was regardless of social class. Whether you were low class, middle class, upper class, that you had this this equal type of execution. Everybody got the guillotine, right? Which is interesting. I don't know if they think that is like something to be proud of in a way, that it's like we don't discriminate our sacrifices based on social class. Everybody gets the same one, and if they wore that as a badge of honor or something, kind of interesting psychology behind that. But nevertheless, this is going to happen now. The guillotine itself, now in before the guillotine, executions would be done, and beheadings, of course, were a common thing. And the problem with beheadings before the guillotine was, it's not as easy as you think it is. Like, you'd think, all right, just lay somebody down on a tree stump and give them one nice swift blow with an axe. That was not always the case. In fact, in beheadings with a classical beheading with an axe, it was actually quite common that the axe did not actually make one clean blow. That you'd only get through part of the neck, which would be, again, a gory, painful, inhumane thing, I guess, depending on the blow, if you're still conscious at that time. But it was a messy, inefficient process. So the Joseph, I believe Guillotin was his name, invented this, the blade. And I think originally too, the blade was flat, but that is not good either, because there's a lot more friction, all hitting at the same time. So that's when they go to the serrated edge, where it's diagonal like this, which supposedly makes a cleaner cut. And it was an efficient thing. It came down, one swift blow, and as humane and efficient and as less messy, I guess, as a possible for a beheading. But nevertheless, when this thing comes out, people were all for it. And of course, you did it in public, right? Because it was always, to show off that way. So you see these hardcore supporters of the revolution, like Marat here, who are all about this and want to, use this over and over.
Revolution. For him, this included some members of the clergy and nobility who had previously benefited from the cruel system of inequality that existed before the revolution. In many parts of the countryside, local lords had found themselves become a target. Sire, the peasants, they're revolting. Oh, come on, that's a bit harsh. Sure, they smell a bit, but I wouldn't say they're revolting.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of revolt.
Increasingly, these French aristocrats began fleeing France to find solitude in other parts of Europe. And once again, fear began to take hold. The privileged classes of these foreign nations didn't like what they were seeing because they feared revolutionary ideas may spread to their own lands. The National Assembly.
Very important idea, and we have this discussion in my classes. If you are a monarch of another nation, what do you think of the revolution? A couple of ways to think about that. You could be like, maybe France was your enemy in the past, and you're another monarchy, and you're like, cool, they're falling apart, you know what I mean? And maybe it makes them vulnerable, to future attacks or whatever it is you want to do with them. But yeah, maybe you're, I hate the monarchy of France. Good riddance and those sort of things. But then I'm sure eventually, if you're a monarch, if that was your original thought process, eventually you'd come to the point where you go, wait, these are ordinary people overtaking their king, and they're very clear about the reasons by it. And you could probably take that process into going, wait, these things that the monarchy have been doing in France or in our culture, we find this too. Is this going to then influence people in our country? So other monarchs also became very fearful of this, right? Because they don't want it to happen in their country. They don't want their peasants or whatever, their people, to feel inspired by this, especially if this thing's going to be successful, which we still don't know at this time if the French Revolution is going to be actually successful. But if you're a king, even if you hated France, you'd almost be rooting for the monarchy, because again, you don't want to see that happen in your country. So it's an interesting like double-edged sword there about what the rest of Europe is they're keeping an eye on this. This is big news. Keep an eye on how it could turn out, because it could go a lot of different ways. Who knows?
what they were seeing, because they feared revolutionary ideas may spread to their own lands. The National Assembly, actually now the Legislative Assembly, feared that these nations
Renamed
may
it a
decide
bunch of
to
times.
attack. Then why don't we attack them first? No, you idiots, we are definitely not ready for war yet.
Yeah, what are you going to do, attack all the other countries at once?
France declared war in Austria in April 1792 and immediately got pummeled. It also didn't help that Austria's ally, Prussia, joined in the fighting. The Prussian Duke of Brunswick posted a letter warning the revolutionaries that if anything happened to the king, he would burn Paris to the ground. The Duke's letter proved to be a massive success in inspiring the people of Paris to do the exact opposite of what he intended. They were enraged by the threat, and on the 10th of August 1792, the tension in the city exploded, and a mob stormed the king's palace. Fighting broke out between the revolutionaries and the king's Swiss guard, with casualties in the hundreds. King Louis fled and took refuge in the chamber of the Legislative Assembly, where Robespierre and his radical Jacobins were gaining ever more power. Given the developing situation,
people are becoming more and more
the chamber
radical.
decided to hold a vote, and in what some considered to be a second revolution, it was decided to suspend the monarchy entirely. King Louis XVI was now just plain old Louis, and he was sent to a prison cell where an eye could be kept on him. A month later, the newly established National Convention officially declared the French Republic, and society underwent a massive change. Enlightened ideas of democracy and equality were being implemented, but very quickly, these ideas seemed to become secondary to fear, paranoia, and a thirst for blood.
So, you have to think people, in Europe too, are also seeing this potentially as an experiment, especially if you were somebody that was in another country that was supportive of the revolution, which was, what's going to be the product here? What are they going to look like? Because there's not really a lot of republic-type structures here in Europe. It's still in a lot of nations. Now it's all varying degrees of monarchical power, but it's still an age of absolutism, right? Absolute monarchy, and it's kind of an experiment, and you see as the American Revolution was in a way kind of an experiment that the French could look at. Big difference, of course, is America was fighting for independence from a foreign nation. The French are fighting their own nation, right? So it's a different outcome. You can't just declare independence and then do whatever with it. The French have to build a new country, or kind of rebuild and eliminate an existing structure here. But there's not necessarily a good handbook for this, other than maybe the American Revolution, where they can use some of the ideas, especially with a constitution down the road. And but it's still quite a interesting experiment, especially if the people are divided on what it should look like. Okay, but still at this point, the king is out of power, but he still is around. You know what I mean? So that brings up another question: is if you're going to be a republic, can you have a former king laying around? Right? What if he wants to try to do a power grab? You know what I mean? Try to maybe lay low for a bit and then try to do a power grab. So that's going to bring another discussion here that I'm sure they'll talk about is, can you allow a king? Do you kick him out? Just exile him, kick him out of the country, or do you lock him up? What do you do with him? There's a lot of options, but the republic is very, very fragile.
The New Republic began working to violently remove any semblance of the old royalist regime. The church became a prime target. Priests who refused to take an oath to the revolution were deported or arrested. A new state-sponsored atheistic religion named the Cult of Reason was created as a replacement for the Catholic Church. Yes. Notre Dame, along with...
It's because, again, you go back to how... And if you're wondering why would they, kick out religion and all this stuff? You got to understand what the power of the Catholic Church was forever. Remember, the first estate, right? The top class in society in France was the clergy. It was the church. They owned 10% of the land, even though they were 1% of the population. Didn't pay taxes. Them and the monarchy were completely intertwined in their function. So the power of the church and trying to needed they think to be stopped to make sure that power structure isn't still existing. So you can see a little bit of you got to look at it very much as as more like demolishing a political institution, probably more than even a philosophical thing, but because of how much power again the church had in the past.
Many other churches had their religious treasures destroyed and were converted to temples of reason. Even the Christian calendar didn't survive, as a brand new revolutionary calendar was soon introduced. Hey, honey, I'm home. Yep.
Hold on. I want to look. Let's look back at what they...
As a brand new
these things right here. So check this out. The New Republic. My gosh, look at how many changes there are. 100 seconds per minute, 100 minutes per hour, 10 hours in a day, and an entirely new set of months. You ever heard of that? Like, it was like the month of Thermidor or something. This sounds like a disaster here. You can't be on just a totally different calendar thing and timing structure than the rest of the world. That would be a logistical nightmare. So, as you know, this probably isn't going to hold up very long. But what an interesting thing to try to attempt there.
Revolutionary calendar was soon introduced. Hey, honey, I'm home. Yeah, whatever, jerk. Whoa, what's wrong with you? You forgot. Forgot what? Everything. This entire year. My birthday was on the 3rd of Germinal. Our anniversary was the 12th of Thermidor. And you promised that in Frymare, we'd go on a romantic weekend trip to Venice. No, I said we'd do that in December. December hasn't been a thing for years.
See, it'd be such a nightmare.
Now under the control of the radical Sans-Culottes, began rounding up suspected enemies of the revolution and sending them to prison in the thousands. Naturally, a large number of those arrested were members of the clergy and aristocracy. As France's foreign enemies continued to close in, panic spread. Georges Danton made impassioned calls for men to defend the Republic, and tens of thousands of troops left Paris for the front lines. However, in their absence, Paris was left to its own devices. As enemy troops arrived in Verdun, the people of Paris feared that their crowded prisons were becoming a breeding ground for counter-revolutionary conspiracy.
Better take care of it yourself, huh?
The Prussians reached Paris and freed the aristocrats. Marat believed he knew what would happen. The aristocrats would enact their vengeance on the people. Fearing those they had already
Everything's based on fear here.
Descended on Paris's prisons. They broke in, and during the brutal September massacres, aristocrats, priests, and others were tried and executed on the spot. Even women and children weren't spared. With over 1,600 victims,
not much of a judicial process, really.
Spread across Europe. One British newspaper wondered, are these the rights of man? Is this the liberty of human nature?
Good point, right? They'd been preaching this, the rights of people and equality and whatever. And then look what they're doing. They are being incredibly violent, right? You punish these people just because of their social standing that they were born into or whatever it is. And of course it went further than that too, because this is done by the radical group, right? The radicals inside the revolution here. And they're the ones that are taking it so far where they're like, we can't just like create this new country. We have to eliminate all that oppose what we are trying to go for, all the opposition almost. Like, our country cannot be created and cannot go forward while there's still resistance there. And as you can tell, if you're doing these trials or whatever, you can't even really call them trials, but these judgments, these sentences almost right on the spot, you can't imagine there can be a lot of defense for people. And you wonder how many people actually get executed or whatever, jailed, imprisoned, that maybe did not necessarily show all of that anti-revolution kind of excitement or whatever. And because I know too, it's like, it wasn't just like being supportive of the king that made you the bad guy. Like, I think it goes even far enough where it's like, you don't hate them enough. Like, you don't hate the monarchy enough. You're not supportive of the revolution enough. You know what I mean? And this fear that's going on is obviously, it's like, they don't want anyone sitting on the fence here. And again, when you look at the brutality of what is about to happen here in the coming months, a quote like this, out of London is very, very fitting in that way. And it makes you question a lot of it. And it probably makes you think, is this thing just going to crumble in on itself anyways?
But there was still one man in particular that Robespierre and his radicals really wanted to see executed. Austria and Prussia pledged that after they defeated France, they'd return King Louis to the throne. Well, checkmate Austria and Prussia, because you can't return a man to the throne if he's already dead. Citizen Louis Capet was put on trial for treason. Obviously, he was found guilty, but his punishment was less certain. Many moderates wanted to simply deport him, but Robespierre insisted the revolution could only live if the king was dead. A vote was held, and by just one vote, Louis was sentenced to the
guillotine. Wow. So because it's like, okay, exile him, maybe you can get him out, but the bottom line, the fear here, that Robespierre and people like him were saying is, all that's going to do is that's going to make it worse. Like, he's going to go out to some country, again, like Austria or something, and just regroup, and they may take over, no matter what he says. He may say, hey, if you just let me go, I'll promise I'll never bother you again. But, I mean, they don't trust this. But you could see how, look at the votes here, how divided this new government actually is about the question of the king, and as one vote difference, right, justifiable to take, this man's life. And of course, that's their system they're going to do here. So amazing. You have the people have voted to execute their king. Not a lot of instances of that in history.
If you don't mind, I'd like to say a few words first.
Gentlemen,
I am innocent of everything of which I am accused. Yep. Wait, you're too loud. They can't hear me. Hang on, I haven't finished yet. Wait, dude.
His priest recorded his speech, by the way, if you want to look it up sometime. It's kind of interesting. It's not that profound, but
heard the guns fired,
it is
signaling
interesting.
Her husband's death. Before long, she would meet the same fate. Back
at time. Let it roll for a sec. So that's a question too now, of course, of what they're saying is, okay, we've killed off the king. He's no longer an issue. What about his wife, right? What needs to happen to her? Same thing. Let her go back home to Austria, where she's from. That's going to bring another set of discussions in. But anyways, they've executed their king, and what now to do with the queen?
Death. Before long, she would meet the same fate. Back on the war front, France defied all expectations.
I don't know if they're going to get to it. They execute the queen too a few months later.
But then more countries joined the coalition against France, and it all went to pot again. What do? Conscript the masses. The National Convention introduced a conscription law with each regional department having to meet a certain quota of men for the army. However, not everyone was happy with this new law. You see, while Paris was definitely a hotbed for radical revolutionary fervor, some of the regions outside of Paris weren't quite so keen on the revolution. Some were largely still conservative, still supported the church, and just didn't suffer from that much inequality before the revolution.
Kind of almost sounds a little bit like the American Revolution, right? Where the American Revolution, the most revolutionary of the revolutionaries were city people, right? They were people that lived in somewhere like Boston. People that interact the most with that which they're revolting against. Where, if you live in a rural area, you don't see as much of the impact. You live in a little bit more of a bubble here. So that is a common thing that you find if you're comparing and contrasting these type of scenarios with other ones.
So as the revolution turned increasingly violent and anti-Christian, many were outraged. Now they were being conscripted to fight for the new republic they hated.
Yeah.
That was the last straw. Counter-revolutionary uprisings erupted in a number of
How do you
regions
unify
across France.
something that diverse?
Some would last for years, such as in the Northwest, where a large-scale uprising was led by the Owls. Why were they called the Owls?
Yeah,
because
never
their
heard of them.
leader was named Jean Owl. Why was he called Jean Owl? Possibly because he could do a really good impression of an owl. Really? That's what we're going with? Owls? Just because this guy can do an impression of one? Hit him with it, Jean.
Do it.
Hoot, hoot.
Nailed it.
Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. The Chouannerie uprising lasted
Fear
all
the
the way
owls.
until 1800. In the summer
Are
of
they,
1893,
hold on. Were they hooting?
uprising lasted all pretty good.
Listen to the people.
The Chouannerie uprising lasted all the way until 1800.
Yeah.
In the summer of 1793, the southern city of Toulon invited the British Navy over for some tea and crumpets.
Oh, not a good
They
idea.
asked if they'd possibly like to stay and occupy the city. Being an important naval
Go for your
base,
biggest
this was
enemy.
a heavy blow to the Republic, who sent a relatively unknown young captain by the name of Napoleon
yep.
Bonaparte to help stage the siege of the city. Toulon was recaptured by France in the winter.
They have a video
and
on
for
Napoleon?
his service,
We should-
Napoleon was promoted to the rank of brigadier general.
Love to do a Napoleon episode about whatever or something sometime, because his experience through the French Revolution is a very interesting one, because he's on the outside, right? He is going to be fighting. He's like fighting for the revolution on its borders rather than from the inside. So he sees it from a different perspective. And that's a really interesting thing, because he's going to sort of rise out of the ashes that is this thing. So love to do something on him later if there's something good to react to or whatever. If you know of anything, let me know.
The most infamous counter-revolution, however, occurred in the Vendée region. Throughout 1793, revolutionary forces clashed with the region's Catholic and royal army. The Republic defeated the counter-revolution through cruel pacification. In particular, General Jean-Baptiste Carrier committed brutal atrocities. In one instance, he had thousands of civilians, priests, women, and children tied to ships, which were then sunk. Carrier would later be found guilty of war crimes and executed.
Brutal.
Back in Paris, the
Revolution
government was
that's
still
eating
dominated
itself here.
by moderates. With the war going badly, revolts in the provinces, and the economy getting worse, it seemed the government just wasn't doing a very good job. Radical fear for the safety
They don't know
of
what
the
they're
revolution
doing.
intensified, and Marat even began calling for the moderates in the government to be executed. In return, the moderates called for the arrest of Marat. This led to a chain of events
he's going
with two sides
too
of
far.
heated conflict. Robespierre declared the Jacobins to be an insurrection and called on the people to arm themselves. It all ended on the 31st of May 1793 with the National Convention surrounded by radical sans-culottes and 29 moderate Girondin politicians arrested. From this moment on, the moderates ceased to be a political force. Robespierre and his radicals would be in almost total control of the government. And this brings us to the story of a woman named Charlotte Corday.
Before we get to that, they have now purged the moderates, right? That is a huge moment where you now have basically one political party, right? It's in essence a dictatorship, almost by definition. There you have one political party that is in charge. And obviously, they're going to be able to do what they want to do. But yeah, that is a pretty big moment in this process. The moderates are gone. You got nothing but people that were on pretty much the most radical of the sides.
Charlotte lived in the northwest city of Caen, and like many in the area, was horrified at the rapid radicalization and increasing violence of the revolution. And the man she blamed more than anyone
Marat.
was Jean-Paul
This guy just
Marat. She
everything
wanted
he
to bring
spits
peace back to
out
France, and so she did something drastic.
vitriolical.
She traveled to Paris and told
that's a
Marat
word.
she had a list of enemies for him to publish
Vitriol.
in his paper. Marat eagerly invited her in for a meeting. So where's that list of enemies you promised me? Here it is. Wait a minute. This isn't the list of enemies. It just says yippee-ki-yay, mother.
Yeah.
And just like that, Marat was no more.
If you didn't learn more about, or if you didn't, I'm hoping you watched the first video, but this guy is such an interesting figure, just from the fact, not of just what the radical nature of his rhetoric, but his illness, right? This is a dude that had like a skin issue or whatever, and had to basically almost live in a medical bath, which I heard was like down in sewers pretty much, and had to be in there all the time, and he's just sitting there in these bathtubs in the sewers or whatever. I'm not positive on the sewer thing, correct me if I'm wrong. Thought I'd heard that somewhere. And just he writes, right, The People's Friend, I believe is his publication, and it's just nothing but like just vitriol, the word I was trying to figure out earlier. And it was powerful because so many people followed him, and especially now that like the Jacobins, the most radicals, are now in charge of the government, like whatever he puts on paper, they're just going to go out and do, to the point where they're eliminating so many people that they don't trust this guy. Like, you know, you do not want to appear on one of his lists. And as these times go on, and Robespierre is going to be the same way. It's like the lists of people were becoming closer and closer to home in a way that eventually they're going to be people that these people know, friends of them, right? People that went up through the revolution with them, and start going after your closest people. And the paranoia is obviously just off the charts at this time. But the Marat figure is such an interesting one on so many different levels for so many different reasons.
Charlotte was quickly arrested and sent to the guillotine. Her dream of
She
restoring
kills him.
peace, however, died with her. Marat became a martyr. In temples of reason, symbols of the dead Marat
They're eating their
became
own.
the new
Revolutions.
crucifix.
Oh, I
Instead,
heard of that.
He became
Isn't this crazy? I forgot about this. They made a
temples
statue of
reason,
him.
Symbols of the dead Marat became the new crucifix. In martyr.
Wait, so I'm sorry, I just keep going back. But
Symbols of the dead
I
Marat.
thought I'd heard that they made like a statue or whatever of him in his bathtub as like the new like worship thing, or person that you worship. You imagine that? There's your idol you're worshiping.
became the new crucifix. In death, he became an even more powerful inspiration
There'll be
for the
one there.
extreme levels of violence that were about to rip the
Nice,
rest of the Republic. That's
connection
right.
there.
Here comes the Reign of Terror.
Yep.
If you thought this revolution already sounds pretty violent, well, you ain't seen nothing yet, son. The radicals were now in control, and they believed not only was France surrounded by foreign enemies, but that within the masses, there were also plenty of internal ones too. Individuals not loyal to the revolution, conspiring to bring about its downfall. Robespierre and the rest of the radical faction were
all
having
hearsay
none of
too.
it. A new committee of public safety was established with 12 members. Its purpose was to protect the new French Republic from its enemies, and it basically became a 12-man dictatorship with Robespierre as its leading voice.
Let's go ahead and just revel at the fact that this is the name of the group that is supposed to keep the stability here in Paris. They're called the Committee of Public Safety. And these people are going to execute, if I remember right, like 40,000 people in the year of the Reign of Terror in, was it July 1793 to 94? That is, and I think that's just the guillotine numbers. That's basically 110 people a day. That is their job. I always thought that was ironic, and the kids get a kick out of that when we talk about that in class. Like, wait, they're called the Committee of Public Safety? How ironic.
Public safety was established with 12 members. Its purpose was to protect the new French Republic from its enemies, and it basically became a 12-man dictatorship with Robespierre as its leading voice. The Revolutionary Tribunal,
a man so powerful
was
can
also
pick and
reinstated.
choose who lives
a
and
special
dies.
court created to streamline the process
Just
of
bam,
trying
quick.
suspected enemies and handing out their death sentences. With these two new institutions, Robespierre wanted to scare France's enemies straight.
Very little due
September
process.
1793, it was announced that terror would be the order of the day.
Wow.
In other words, fear had become official government policy. And from then onwards, we enter into the period known as the Reign of Terror.
They're right here.
Paying too much for travel accommodation?
The period of the
Unlock
most
up to 50% off with
executions
the Go to
that the
Summation
revolution will carry out. We'll see if they confirm the stats that I was saying here earlier, but this is it. This is the peak. This is when the guillotine was its reddest.
Spies and secret police were everywhere and watched the people closely. France's public had to be extremely careful what they said and how they behaved.
Someone's listening.
Obviously,
Someone's watching.
Criticizing this new system, or the government, would quickly have you sent off to the guillotine. But that's not all. Even the most minor offense could have you tried before the Revolutionary Tribunal. Hello, Citizen Martin. Hello, Monsieur Dubois. Monsieur? Did I just hear you say Monsieur? That's the old style of address, my friend. To the guillotine! You know what? I didn't like him, but I do feel kind of bad for the king and his family. Oof, expressing sympathy for the royal family, are we? To the guillotine! 12 sous for a loaf of bread? That's way overpriced. To the guillotine! Man, this bread line is taking forever. To the guillotine! And you look like you're thinking anti-revolutionary thoughts. To the guillotine. Max, we're sending way too many people to the guillotine. To the guillotine! Chop, 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 chop. It was insane. All across France, about 40,000 people were killed for suspected crimes against liberty. Let's say your neighbor won't stop mowing the lawn at 7 in the morning.
This is awesome.
Is tell the government they've been talking smack about the
I would use this kind of analogy
There's a
in
good
class.
chance they'll end up in front of the Revolutionary Tribunal. Maybe they'll even be executed, taking a metaphorical load off your shoulders and a literal one off theirs. The most prominent victim of the Reign of Terror...
So, hold on, go back. I don't know if this actually happened. Obviously, the lawnmower thing didn't happen, but it was like the evidence did not have to be very strong to go to have that death sentence. It's like all you had to do is report that they were being sympathetic towards the king, or against the revolution, or whatever, and just these trumped up charges that have a lot of it like no basis. I was wondering, we kind of mess around with this in class. It's like, yeah, if you hate your neighbor. You love to get rid of them, right? That neighbor's dog's always pooping on your lawn, or they're mowing the lawn way too early in the morning. Hey, you want to get rid of them? Just go down to the office of the Committee of Public Safety and say, hey, I heard this person says they love the king or something, or whatever it is. They love the monarchy, and then they're gone. Who knows if it went to that? But what we are pretty sure of is these trials or whatever, and the evidence brought forth. Probably did not have to be that strong, because there's no power check on the Committee of Public Safety, right? The government is the Jacobins, who are radicals that basically support them. So any kind of oversight that would happen are by people that would support him anyways. It makes Maximin Robespierre such a powerful figure, because as one of the people on this committee, he says it's going to happen. And having that power of life and death is pretty incredible to have, and have in an almost unchecked way completely.
for suspected crimes against liberty. Let's say your neighbor won't stop mowing the lawn at 7 in the morning. Well, then all you gotta do is tell the government they've been talking smack about the revolution. And there's a good chance they'll end up in front of the Revolutionary Tribunal. Maybe they'll even be executed, taking a metaphorical load off your shoulders and a literal one off theirs. The most prominent victim of the Reign of Terror was a certain Marie Antoinette, who was finally tried and found guilty of treason in 1793. She expected she'd be brought to the guillotine in a royal carriage, fit for a queen. All the Republic could provide for her, however, was a wooden tumbrel. At 37 years old, the most hated woman in French history met her end on the 16th of October, 1793. Robespierre had saved the revolution through
9-10 months before or after
was being suppressed.
her husband Louis was gone.
Was no longer quite as bad. Even the French military had got its act together again and pummeled the Allies at the Battle of Fleurus. For Danton and his followers, the time was right to try to normalize the French Republic. Hey Robespierre, so we were thinking that since things are finally going better, maybe we should rein in the terror. And while we're on it, we could possibly start taking it easier on the church. And also try to end this costly war. Oh, crap.
Yep.
As time went on, Robespierre seemed to go, for lack of a better term, a bit mental. He was hell-bent on creating what he called a republic of virtue, and for him, this meant amping up the bloodshed even more. Throughout the spring and summer of 1794, executions reached an unprecedented level during a period known as the Great Terror. Even those closest to him found their way to the guillotine if they dared oppose his ideas and actions, and he began alienating himself from the rest of the convention. He created a new deistic religion called the Cult of the Supreme Being, along with the new annual Festival of the Supreme Being. Man, I think Robespierre is really starting to lose it. He thinks he's a god or something. Nonsense. Sure, he's gone a little extreme, but he doesn't think he's a god.
Wait.
My children, bathe your immortal souls in the virtue of my republic.
This guy's gone too far.
He's completely lost it.
Yep.
Robespierre's ultimate mistake.
Yeah, I've heard about this. He unveils himself on some, float or something in this, like, white robed angelic figure, and it's I think they even created like a new deity. Their deity's like the goddess of wisdom and understanding. I forgot what it was, and he's like personifying it as himself and parading himself around, and it looks like all this has gone to his head, and you could probably see where this is heading. The architect of the Great Terror and much of the revolution is pissing off his inner circle.
However, came on July 26th when he made a speech to the National Convention in which he said this: I have in my hand a brand new list of enemies to be sent to the guillotine, and many of you are
Joseph
on this
McCarthy.
list. I'm not going to tell you who yet. What do you think of that?
Look up McCarthyism.
I think we should send Robespierre to the guillotine first.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
All in favor?
And they all did.
No. 2 days later, Robespierre became the final victim of the monstrous terror and paranoia he had created.
He actually tried to commit suicide
Many
first.
historical accounts of the revolution
shot himself and it didn't kill him
with the death
while he's in prison waiting
his terror. But the revolution officially continued for another 5 years until 1799. So what happened between now and then? Well, after the fall of Robespierre, a more moderate political group called the Thermidorians took control of the convention.
Down a little bit.
They wanted to restore stability to the government. Now, Robespierre's allies and other radicals who had fueled the terror themselves became the target of political suppression.
Flipping back to the moderates.
Took on the radical sans-culottes in the streets during a period named the White Terror. In 1795, the Thermidorians drafted a new constitution and created a government called the Directory, with the purpose of preventing power from being able to fall into the hands of a single individual again. As this new government was being established, royalists who wanted to bring the monarchy back to France saw this moment as an opportunity to strike. They staged an insurrection in Paris and battled with the National Guard in the streets. Luckily, one Napoleon Bonaparte happened to be in Paris at the time, and he took control of the situation, firing on the crowd and putting down the insurrection. From this moment on, the people of Paris would never again be able to stage a popular uprising and lost their control over the revolution. For his actions, Napoleon became a general and was sent to take control of the French armies in Italy. The new Directory remained a fairly ineffective government for the remainder of the revolution. It was plagued with corruption and struggled to keep the economy afloat, and as a result, wasn't very popular. For the people of France, with the strict social customs of both royalist France and the terror gone, they didn't really know what to do with themselves. Men no longer removed their hats when talking to women. Different classes began intermingling, and a publication began circulating that looked a lot like a modern dating app. It was social Anarchy. Outside of France, the war continued. In 1795,
Equality
France
slash
took the
anarchy,
Netherlands,
right?
where they set up a puppet state. Then they negotiated both Prussia and Spain
Yeah,
out of the war.
Napoleon's
The
almost
British
in charge of
attempted
the
to land French
revolution now with
royalists
all
in
this.
the west to reinforce rebellion, but that plan failed. In 1796, the French planned a three-pronged attack with the aim of marching on Vienna and knocking Austria out of the war. The two northern armies were defeated and forced to retreat. However, Napoleon in the south, with groundbreaking military strategy, won battle after battle after battle.
You can see how he's going to become more and more popular as there are so many failures at this time in the French military, and his group, wherever they go, they're just knocking out victory. So he's going to be just zooming up the military ladder, which he did. Again, win when others aren't. Yeah, you're going to make your way to the top. So this is his rise.
Battle. He pushed the Austrians out of Italy and began closing in on Vienna. The Austrians freaked out, and Napoleon oversaw the signing of a peace treaty. He had almost single-handedly knocked Austria out of the war, and by the way, he was only 28. So maybe it's about time you moved out of your mom's basement. Napoleon became a famed hero among the French people, but his aspirations were still higher. He briefly went off to Egypt and discovered a bunch of gnarly Egyptian stuff, but then the British destroyed his fleet and trapped his forces. Say, Napoleon, sir, you're not going to leave us here stuck in Egypt and return to France, are you? Nonsense, my boy. I would never dream of abandoning my loyal soldiers. Wow, what's that over there? On his return to
I had heard, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm always open if I'm saying something wrong or whatever. If you have evidence to the contrary, I want to learn too. But back to Napoleon of why on earth would you go and invade Egypt? Right? Yeah, they're a British colony and stuff, but like, why do that? And then I heard this kind of idea about that where Napoleon was somebody who was born and bred for the military. He went into military school at a very young age. And I had heard that, he was, of course, really interested in history. And especially the great leaders, the great generals, the great men of history were really inspiring to him. And I had heard that Alexander the Great was of course, one of them. And one of the big successful victories, moments in the life of Alexander was when he took over Egypt. Right, but it's a little different because when Alexander the Great invades into Egypt, that was part of the Persian Empire. Now, the Egyptians hated being part of the Persian Empire, so they actually kind of semi-welcomed him, the locals, I should say, and again saw him probably more like a liberator than a conqueror in some fashion. But that had meant so much, even go back to Alexander, because this was the great Egyptian empire, right? This is the Egyptians who the Greeks, they loved, and but I've heard people wonder did that have actually influence on Napoleon? Did he go into Egypt almost in a symbolic fashion of trying to emulate his hero Alexander the Great? Julius Caesar, by the way, as well as one of people the other influenced him. I don't know if that is for sure, but I'd heard that before, and it'd be just kind of an interesting thing if that is what honestly motivated a military campaign, which actually did very poorly. One interesting thing that did come out of that, though, something very important, which is the founding of the Rosetta Stone at this time. Rosetta Stone is the stone that we used to back in the 1800s. There, they find it, and then a couple decades later or so, we're able to use it to translate ancient hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphics, which up to this point had become a lost thing. And look into more of the Egyptian stone, or the Rosetta Stone. What it basically was a message written 3 times in 3 different languages. One of them being Greek, and a couple, and then the Egyptian kind of long handwriting, and then the hieroglyphics. And they used the Greek because Greek was known at that time to translate the hieroglyphics. That is actually one very positive thing that came out of that. It totally opened the door of Egyptology, but I digress. Let's continue on. So we've got about a minute or 2 left. Thanks for sticking with me so far here.
Paris, Napoleon found himself to be extremely popular, and the government extremely unpopular, and he started getting some power-hungry ideas. Conveniently, a politician named Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès approached Napoleon and said, "Hey man, since you're so popular, do you want to help me stage a coup?" Great idea.
Coup.
Let's stage a coup,
Directory?
and then I'll coup you. What? Napoleon, with the help of his politician brother, entered the government chamber, possibly got punched in the face, and finally his troops intimidated the council to dissolve the government and create a new constitution that basically made Napoleon a dictator.
Sounds a little
there you have
Julius
it, the
Caesar-y
French
there, huh?
Revolution, born with the great promise of liberty and equality. The common people dared challenge an oppressive system that had existed for centuries. But before they knew it, they found liberty sidelined by terror, equality that possibly didn't quite hit the mark, and an absolute monarchy replaced by an absolute dictator. Napoleon began stabilizing French society. He restored the Catholic Church and got rid of that crazy calendar, among other things. But he remained
A lot of
ever
compromises.
ambitious. He was France's first consul, but he slept soundly at night dreaming of being something even bigger. Napoleon's expansionist aspirations, combined with the ongoing conflict in Europe, would eventually lead the continent into a huge conflict known today as...
Coming up, maybe? Cool. I hope they do. Yeah, definitely need to do a Napoleon episode here, because you can't really talk about the revolution without talking about Napoleon. All right. So one of the questions we have in our class, and we talk about especially at the end, is it's about Napoleon, which was did he, when he came into power, right, a few years before even this, was he looking to end the revolution, or was he trying to continue it? And you can make a case on either side, because and since they kind of looked like foreshadowed to a Napoleon video, I'll leave out some of my other comments that rolling through my head right now about Napoleon, but it is an interesting topic to think about, definitely have in the back of your mind, which is eventually, if they do this video, what role did he have? Is he somebody that was truly a man of the revolution and fighting for those ideas, or is he, what some people have often said, basically exploiting the revolution for his own personal ambitions? Especially if you're one that was talking, or is on those lines, that he wants to be one of these great emperors or conquerors of history, like Julius Caesar again, or Alexander the Great, or Charlemagne, or any other ones that he was known to have studied. But brings an interesting topic there. But awesome. Thank you for sticking with this. I know this was a longer video. There's plenty of stopping. I mean, it was a 22-minute video plus all my stuff. I really appreciate you sticking around, and hopefully you enjoyed watching the video and getting my feedback. But as always, the Oversimplified crew did an amazing job. Great, funny, great information. I learned, again, a bunch of extra things as well, which was awesome. Yeah, that's I think that'll do it for us. Once again, I'll leave a link to the original video down below so that you can give them a like and give them a view, so they can get that milestone for there. One other thank you, if you are out here, maybe I'll make another video at some time, but we passed the 1,000 subscriber mark. This channel launched about a month ago, and I think this is like my the 14th video maybe, and the support has been incredible, and all your comments have been awesome. I really appreciate you doing this. Definitely makes me want to keep doing it, to keep going on if this is something you're interested in. But yeah, I've kind of been blown away. I didn't think things would take off as much as they have, so I really appreciate you sticking around and just watching, whether you're commenting or whatever or not, just being here. And if you saw and heard me right now, I really appreciate your time. It really does mean a lot. So with that, we'll go ahead and end this video, and we'll see you on the next one, whenever that is. See ya.